Live from KTTC, your weather authority, this is KTTC News at 6.
Protests in Minneapolis continue as the outrage and call for justice for George Floyd continues to grow. Today, state and city leaders plead for peaceful activism as the governor calls on the National Guard for assistance.
Last night, protests turned into looting of Target and other stores in the area and multiple structure fires in the area. And the question on everyone's minds is, will the officers involved face charges? Thanks for joining us. Tonight, we continue to show you all angles of this ever-developing story.
From protests turning violent to those still trying to demonstrate peacefully and call for justice. First, within the last hour, federal and local investigators speak up about this investigation.
Our Barrett Leone joins us live in the studio after listening in. Barrett, what can you tell us?
Well, good evening, Tom and Caitlin. The Department of Justice announced that Floyd's death investigation is a top priority, and top prosecutors and FBI investigators are assigned on the case. United States Attorney Erica McDonald says that, quote, the highest of the high are on the case. She was joined today by the FBI, the Minnesota Bureau of Criminal Apprehension, and Hennepin County Attorney Mike Freeman. The agencies promise a robust criminal investigation in George Floyd's death. With protests turning violent, many were hoping and calling for charges on the 4 officers tonight. However, Hennepin County Attorney Mike Freeman, echoing statements from surrounding agencies, says that the process needs to be done right.
That video is graphic and horrific and terrible, and no person should do that. But my job in the end is to prove that he violated a criminal statute, and there is other evidence that does not support a criminal charge. We need to wade through all of that evidence and to come through with a meaningful determination, and we are doing that to the best of our ability.
Freeman says the investigation will be swift and meticulous, but did not give a clear timeline. He also promises to post all findings of the investigation online, criminal charges or not. Anyone with information on the case is encouraged to call 1-800-CALL-FBI. Reporting live in the studio, Barrett Leone, KTTC News.
Barrett, thank you. Also this evening, demonstrations continue in South Minneapolis as protesters are calling for justice in the death of Mr. Floyd. Our Uba Ali joins us live after having to leave the area because it was simply getting too dangerous. And Uba, how are you, and what was the scene like?
Yeah, good evening, Tom and Caitlin. Chuck, my photographer Chuck and I are both okay, but earlier there was a man stabbed and police officers tried to render aid. They couldn't even make it through the protesters. It took them about 5 minutes, and once they were able to come in, protesters started throwing water bottles, started throwing rocks, and that's when things went violent. Tear gas was thrown out, rubber bullets being shot out, but the good news here is the police were able to render aid to the man who was stabbed, and they were able to leave the area. Now, I want to let you guys know that the community leaders here are trying their hardest to continue to tell people that they need to peacefully protest what's going on here in Minneapolis.
Can't make no money off of being peaceful.
Emotions high in South Minneapolis as the city continues to deal with the aftermath of George Floyd's death.
They killed that man on this curb. They killed him on the curb.
As tension and smoke still looms over Minneapolis, in the middle of it all, a cry for change.
We are tired of this stuff. It can't happen this way.
When I saw this go down last night, the only thing I could think of doing was coming to help clean up.
Angela and about 100 other volunteers showed up to pick up glass pieces and board up businesses ruined last night.
No one else is going to do it if people don't do it, right?
But as many gathered to lean on one another during these times, not everyone was on the same page.
Guess what we finna do? We finna clean up our goddamn community.
And if they don't convict them, this is nothing. This is nothing. It's going to get worse. This is going to be worse than in L.A. They plan on tearing up this. They're already over by the Midway in St. Paul, wrecking the Target. This is nothing. It's going to get worse.
Here at the memorial site, it's somewhat of a different scene. It's not protesters lined up in front of officers, but rather protesters gathering in chants for hopes that there will be change one day.
Say his name! George Floyd! No justice, no what? Peace! No justice, no peace! No justice, no peace!
What you're looking at is the remains of a car that was set on fire last night during the violent protest. Now, the situation in the environment is a lot calmer than it was a few moments ago when protesters started throwing things at police officers. But I think the message here that people are the community leaders at least are trying to get across, you can peacefully protest and make your voice heard. for now. Reporting live in South Minneapolis, Uba Ali, KTTC News.
Thank you, Uba. Again, protests are happening across Minneapolis. New today, one in the downtown area. That's where we find our Kamaria Bray live on the scene for us this evening. Kamaria.
Caitlin, I'm at the Hennepin County Government Center for the protest called Jail Killer Cup. Now, there's about 1,000 people that are here, and protesters have lost trust in the Attorney General and the Hennepin County Prosecutor's Office. And the Hennepin County Attorney, Mike Freeman, they want someone outside those agencies to prosecute the officers involved in the death of George Floyd. I spoke with a woman who knew Floyd and is the aunt of Philando Castile, a Minnesota man who was shot and killed by police in 2016. She says it's time for the justice system to hold these officers accountable.
The man that has been prosecuting for the last 18 years, there should be no way unethically he has been, inappropriate has been, and he's never in history, if I'm not mistaken, charged a European American or Caucasian officer behind any killing of anybody of color. That's unacceptable. I mean, we sit back and we take that, and we need to demand that there be some outside people that charge this officer and those involved and get justice.
Now, things are pretty calm here. The speaker said that they don't want any issues, but they just want their voices to get heard. And right now, marchers are actually marching downtown Minneapolis. So we'll have more coverage at 10. In Minneapolis, I'm Kamaria Bray, KTTC News.
Maria, thank you. And as you just said, there has been an extreme amount of looting, vandalism happening during the protests. Today, the St. Paul Police Department, along with the mayor, had a press conference to discuss what is happening.
Are resolved to do everything in our power to figure out how to keep this from ever happening again. We've heard from the Floyd family who have called for peace during this time. And unfortunately, we also have individuals in our community who are taking the microphone, who are taking the attention, who are taking the focus off of those peaceful protesters, who are frustrated, who are enraged, who desperately desire for something to change.
We're going to take a final live look into the protests happening now in Minneapolis.
Yeah, this is the third day now of protests in the city after 4 officers arrested George Floyd and one held him down while an officer used his knee on his neck for more than 5 minutes as Floyd pleaded that he could not breathe. Floyd died, the officers were fired, but the call for justice continues tonight as many are asking for charges against the officers. And last night we saw the demonstrations turn violent, and now the governor is calling on the National Guard for assistance. And as you can see right now, protesters are marching in downtown Minneapolis. We will continue, of course, to update you on how tonight goes as well.
Of course, that scene there, very peaceful at this time.
Absolutely.
Let's march. You know, instead of this violence, hatred, let's spread peace and love.
For the third night in a row now, protests continue in the Twin Cities calling for justice for George Floyd after he died in Minneapolis police custody. A graphic video showing an officer's knee pressed into his neck. Here's a live look at tonight's protests. As you can see, devastating images emerging tonight. But now, as you just heard, residents and leaders are begging for peace. Good evening and thank you for joining us. We have crews on the ground in Minneapolis tonight as these protests continue. The governor has now issued the National Guard to assist in these protests that are turning into riots. First, let's check in with our Uba Ali, who's been in the area all day long. And Uba, what are you seeing tonight?
Good evening, Tom and Caitlin. I'm on East Lake Street and Minnehaha Avenue, where the majority of destruction happened Wednesday night. And as the sun sets today, as you can see behind me, more riots, more violent protests happening. Earlier today, throughout the day, people chanting Black Lives Matter peacefully. Other times, protesters turning violent. Others taking matters into their own hands and throwing rocks and water bottles towards police. And that is when things went violent today. Tear gas, rubber bullets being tossed into the crowd just so police can help render aid to a man who was stabbed. Mixed emotions throughout the crowd, some echoing leaders and saying enough is enough when it comes to violence.
See, back in the day when Martin Luther King marched, you know, it wasn't about violence and none of that. It was about marching the street. But we over here destroying our own community. Like, what kind of message are we passing? Hatred. We don't want to pass that. If we want to stop something and eliminate something, we got to use our mouth instead of violence.
I've been here all day, Tom and Caitlin, and what I can tell you is that community leaders are pleading with these folks to continue to peacefully protest. For now, up in South Minneapolis, Uba Ali, KTTC News.
Thank you, Uba. And our team coverage continues. Our Maria Bray is in Minneapolis tonight, where she's been at a peaceful demonstration in downtown Minneapolis all throughout the day. Cam, how are things going tonight?
Caitlin, like you said, downtown Minneapolis on 5th and Hennepin, and we're hoping that it stays peaceful. There are hundreds of protesters that have blocked off this intersection, and there are police officers that are in tactical gear. We saw officers on their horses. We saw officers, state troopers also in tactical gear, and people here are pretty much saying that they're not going to stop until justice is served for George Floyd.
The police! No justice, no peace!
You know, my client, I knew him even though he's not family. I mean, my nephew's Philando Castile, and it's like, it's just too much. It's too much. You know, and I'm hoping if anything, we can really get some justice to the county attorney's office. You know.
We simply want the police who did this to go to jail. And we, ideally, if we can't get it, so be it. But ideally, because the Hennepin County prosecutor, Michael Freeman, has never, ever indicted a cop, a white cop, for killing a black person. He's never, ever indicted a white person for killing a black person. And so nobody trusts, he's not trusted.
Because enough is enough.
No justice, no peace.
White people have white privilege, and that is what we need to use. We have access to leaders. We have access to police. We have access to our city council and our mayors and our governors. And we must use our white skin to protect people of color and indigenous people.
Yeah, so behind me, you see there are hundreds of people that are saying George Floyd. They're putting their hands up. They're yelling at the officers over here, and so it's a lot going on right now in Minneapolis. Maria Bray, KTTC News.
Just now into our newsroom, protesters have set fire to the front entrance of the 3rd Precinct Police Building in South Minneapolis. This just happened within the last few minutes. Again, this is live footage you're watching. This all started, the riots, on Monday when video was released, as you know, showing 4 officers arresting George Floyd, holding him down while one officer used his knee on his neck for more than 5 minutes as he pleaded that he could not breathe.
Floyd died, the officers were fired, but the call for justice continues as many are asking for charges against these officers. Tonight, as you can see, the city literally on fire. As the demonstrations continue, you can see the crowd now throwing what appears to be boxes, some of those wooden barricades as well, back into the flames as that crowd continues to grow tonight.
Right, again, this is live footage. Protesters setting fire to the front entrance of the 3rd Precinct Police Building that is in South Minneapolis. In this ongoing story of protests up in the Twin Cities.
A heartbreaking week in Minnesota.